a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I like my coffee dark brown. Some folks, like my wife, add color so it looks less lethal. There are folks who add sugar and flavoring. They don't really seem to like the taste of coffee. They like the taste of all those things that they add to mask the real flavor. I guess they're just looking for the zip from the caffeine when it hits their brain. Why people drink decaf? That's a mystery to me. I like coffee in my coffee. Way back when I was a firefighter, we had an old guy named Mac. He was retired, but he had no family, so he would hang out at the station all the time. He would keep an eye on our things whenever we had to roll out the door. One day I walked into the kitchen and he had 2 cans of coffee, decaf and regular. He was mixing them together. I asked him what he was doing and he said that nobody wanted to drink the decaf, so he had to mix them. I told him just don't buy the decaf. That was something he had never thought of. He thought that people had to drink decaf because of all those commercials. If you just like the taste of coffee and you want only the best coffee in the universe, head over to Organic Man Coffee Trike and ask for the best they have, which is the best. For those of you not in Laredo, you can partake of the best coffee in the universe by going to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Coffee can save your life, especially if you're holding a hot cup of coffee when somebody attacks you. David Subith sent me a note asking about the Gary Sudbrink phone calls. I looked into it, and it reminded me of one of my past shows. If you listen to a few shows, you'll know I hate editing. I try to get it right the first time, and if not, I'll usually leave the mistakes in and I'll leave the good ideas out. Since my new computer, well, newer, I got it for my birthday 2 years ago, my mixer doesn't want to communicate with the computer. Tried everything you can imagine, including professional help. Well, I'm going to edit this weird phone call into the video and the audio and see what happens. If I'm lucky, it'll work out right. If I'm not, well, this show is going to be kind of messed up sounding. For those of you listening and watching, here it is.
You have one old message. Sunday, 9:02 p.m. End of messages.
I played this recording on my show called Cryptid Plants back in February 22nd, 2022. Now, back in 1977, there was a movie called Telephone, starring Charles Bronson and Donald Pleasance. He was the psychiatrist in the first Halloween movie. He also played a lot of other parts. When that music started, to me it sounded almost like some kind of a trigger. Maybe someone somewhere out there will hear it and go do something. Then I got to thinking, maybe I shouldn't have played it on the show. Ah, too late now. It also reminded me of those number stations that Clyde Lewis would talk about. Caller ID said it was out of Odessa, Texas. If you've heard this call or you know something about it, send me a note and let me know what the heck is going on. You can reach me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Gary Sudbrink was a captain in the U.S. Air Force working as a pharmacist. He was stationed in San Antonio, Texas. 1992, Stephen, Gary's brother, was about to get married, and so Gary flew back home for the big event. I've seen his name spelled Stefan and Stephen. I'll go with Stephen because that's how most people spelled it. The next morning, Stephen was driving to church for rehearsals when he noticed a car come flying up behind him. It then began to weave in and out of the lane as if it was trying to pass. Stephen realized this second car belonged to his brother Gary. The car pulled out, got alongside, and then Gary began making weird faces at him from the passenger window. After thoroughly perturbing few seconds, Gary sped up, and pulled away. After the wedding, Stephen managed to corner Gary to find out what was that all about. Why the speeding and the face making? Gary said he had done no such thing. In fact, the rehearsals were held before his plane had even landed. Plus, his car was parked back in San Antonio at the airport. Stephen said yes, he saw his car with him in it, just hours before the rehearsal. When neither man would relent, they both decided it was best to just drop the whole thing. Gary returned to San Antonio wondering what his brother was talking about, and Stephen kept wondering why his brother would lie about such a weird thing. He never questioned how Gary was able to get his car from Texas to New York on a commercial airliner. I read this and I got to thinking about doppelgangers. I've heard so many reports from people who say their friends and family have seen them when they were not even in town. One woman told me that she had seen her niece standing at the end of the aisle in a grocery store. She was looking back at her. The figure ducked behind the shelves just seconds before her real niece walked up behind her. In 1993, Gary was on duty at the pharmacy checking the schedule when he noticed he was going to have several days off in a row in February. Despite base procedures, he decided he was going to take a quick little trip back home and see his parents in Long Island without informing his commanding officer. What they didn't know couldn't hurt him, hopefully. Just in case, Gary reserved his seat using a different name. In the 90s, security was nothing like it is today. You got to keep your shoes on. Nobody fondled you. TSA mostly just stood around the x-ray machines in several airports, not all of them, pretty much doing nothing. Well, some things never change. You only had to show your ID if you were paying for your tickets. Other than that, you had a boarding pass, you got on the plane. The evening before he was to fly back home, he was packing and getting ready for the trip. He heard a noise outside and went out on the balcony to see what was going on. There, just outside, hovering about 20 feet off the ground, was a helicopter. Well, he did live on an Air Force base, but it did seem odd for a helicopter to be that close to the officer's residence. You see weird things from time to time, like that time we had an Apache helicopter begin firing while he was way too close to the motor pool, where we were working on our tanks. The shell cases managed to fall inside the motor pool. I've heard a few different accounts of his trip to the airport. In one, they said he was dressed in his civvies, civilian clothing. In another, he was dressed in his uniform. Air Force personnel get to fly free depending on the airline. If they are under contract, they have seats reserved for servicemen. You don't have to be in uniform, you just show your ID. At the airport, Gary was approached by a man he didn't know. The man pulled out a pen and a notebook and he began asking Gary where he was going. Gary informed him that he had plans to fly to New York, which was no secret that's where the plane was going. The man kept pressing him for more information. This began to bother Gary. The man claimed he was starting a business and he needed this information for some marketing research. I'm that guy that strikes up conversations with strangers. Just last December, I announced to the folks waiting in line at Hobby Lobby that they were all looking too somber. I said, hey, it's Christmas time, and y'all should be happy and show it. Well, a lot of people laughed, and most people smiled, and a few gave me weird looks. The more this stranger pestered Gary, the more uneasy Gary became. The questions were getting a bit personal, like how was his last name spelled? And were there a lot of people in his family? And what kind of house did he live in? And things like that. Things that didn't appear to have a whole lot to do with any kind of marketing research. Well, the flight was announced, and Gary went on board, found his seat by the window. Shortly, a man came on and sat down in the aisle seat. This new stranger began asking all kinds of questions, which I've seen from folks who are a bit nervous about flying. They call it nervous chatter. They're trying to distract themselves from their inner fears. This guy was once again getting a bit too personal with the questions. As the flight crew were preparing for their departure, another passenger stopped next to the stranger, looked at the seat number and his ticket, and said this stranger was in the wrong seat and he had to move. The stranger scooted over one seat and he was now sitting right next to Gary, and he continued with the weird questions. The stranger began pestering Gary with more questions about how did he spell his last name and how many people were in his family, things that he'd already heard earlier. Where was he originally from? When was he planning on returning to Texas? Along comes another passenger and he saw someone was in his seat. This passenger told the stranger he was in the wrong seat, so the guy stood up, moved to the seats behind Gary, leaned over from behind, and continued with the questions. A flight attendant told this stranger to take his seat. The man had to squeeze out of the aisle and move to the back of the plane. Gary had decided not to answer any questions quite some time earlier, but the man just kept asking. Gary arrived at New York Airport and made his way to Long Island, surprising his parents. It wasn't until Gary was there that anyone knew he was heading home. The next day, Gary wanted to see some of his buddies from the past. So he called his best friend, Mike, to see about maybe a night out on the town to get caught up with each other and maybe reminisce a bit about old times. Gary called Mike only to be told he'd already called him the day before. Mike said Gary had called right after landing at LaGuardia Airport, telling his friend that he was not able to get together for a while because he was feeling sick. Gary insisted that he had not landed at LaGuardia, but his plane had landed at JFK. Plus, Gary said he wasn't feeling sick. He had been feeling quite well. Mike kept insisting this conversation had happened from LaGuardia, and Gary explaining that it had not happened anything like that. Confusion was the rule of the day. The conversation began getting under Gary's skin. Mike said maybe they should hang out some other time. Gary decided it might just be best to simply hang out at home for the evening. He didn't want any more weirdness during this trip. The two were about to end their conversation when Gary heard the call waiting sound. I remember it as being a series of beeps. It's been a long time since I've heard it. Gary pushed down the control switch on the phone and then let it back up. The phone immediately went to the next call. What sounded like a mechanical voice or somebody trying to disguise their voice came through the earpiece. The weird voice began talking as if the person knew Gary, but Gary had no idea who it was or why they had called. Just because he was feeling a bit paranoid after the two weirdos from the day before, Gary hit the record button on his answering machine. He missed the first part of the conversation, recording the following. Thank you to whoever took the time to transfer this conversation from tape to paper. Wording is sometimes unintelligible. To add to the mix, Gary's folks became interested in the conversation and their voices could be heard on the recording, so they became a part of the transcript. I am going to try to make my voice sound appropriately weird. This was a Monday, February 8th, 1993. And like I said, they missed the first part of the recording. Gary said, I'll tell you who it is. The voice on the line said, Hello? Gary, yeah? Do you want to speak to him? The voice, is Gary the Sudbrick there? Gary, yeah, who is this? Stephen, are you trying to play some kind of a game with me or what? Gary, huh? Stephen, if you're playing games here, I'm going to kick your butt. The voice, so, how long are you going to be back from Texas? Gary, huh? Voice, you're being impersonated by the other voice. Gary, yeah, this is you, Stephen, you idiot. You're pissing me off, jerk. I'm going to get you on, let's see, what's it says? Review, one new call, out of area. Is Stephen out of the area? He asked his mother. Voice, it interrupted him. How long are you going to be back from Texas? Gary, wait, say that again? The voice, you're being impersonated by the other voice. Gary, wait, hold on. He looks at his mother and asks, is Stephen out of the calling area or what? Gary, what do you mean you don't know? He's in Queens. Well, who are you talking to? Gary, I don't know who the heck I'm talking to. The voice. No? Mom. Hello? Voice. Is Gary Sudbrick there? His mother. Who is this? They have more than one phone on the line. Gary in the background. Let me talk to him. His mother. Somebody sounds like a robot. Gary. Hello? Voice. How long are you going to be back from Texas? Gary. What was that again, sir? The voice. You're being impersonated by the other voice. Gary to his family. Oh, be quiet. Else, eh? Sorry, will you say that again? Gary. Hello? I'm being impersonated by whose voice? Oh. Gary. Yeah, hello. Voice. Is Gary Sudbrink there? Gary. Yeah, hold on a second. His mother. Who is that? Gary. It's Steven. Okay, yeah. What is your question? I'll answer it. His dad in the background. A stranger voice? The voice. So how long are you going to be back from Texas? Gary. How long? The voice interrupting him. You're being impersonated by the other voice. Gary. Right. When am I coming back? Is that your question? The voice. Sudbrink there? His dad. What's the matter with you? Gary. Okay, there was a break. Hold on. You want to know when I'm coming back to Texas? Is that your question? The voice. So how long are you going to be back from Texas? Gary. How long am I going to be back from Texas? The voice. You're being impersonated by the other voice. Gary. That question doesn't even make any sense. Gary. Okay, I'll be coming back eventually. I can't tell you when. You should know that question. The answer to the question because you seem to know more about me than I do. You know what I'm saying. His dad. Are you an intergalactic person? Gary. Are you a space alien? His dad. It sounds like he hung up. Gary. I can't believe this. His dad. He hung up, Gary. Gary. Let's see if he comes back. His dad. All right, I'll hang up. Then there's a dial tone. Gary. Jesus Christ. Oh my God, man. I'm calling Mike right back. There's two beeps on the dial pad. The voice on the phone sounded as if they didn't speak English very well, and they kept asking the same questions over and over. It was a bit hard to understand the voice. Combined with the two strangers at the airport, Gary was getting a bit weirded out. Gary's brother Stephen is 1 year older, and his other brother Brian is 5 years younger. At the moment he received the first call, Gary thought it was Stephen playing a prank on him. Stephen was not known for playing pranks. As they stood there trying to come to a conclusion, the phone rang again. This time, as Gary was lifting the handset, he hit record right away. Gary, what is your question? A bunch of unidentified beeps from the telephone or the answering machine. Gary, yes, speaking. Is this Gary Sudbrink? Yes. Gary, could I answer any questions for you? The voice. Are you back from Texas? Gary. I'm not back yet, no. Voice. How long are you going to be back from Texas? Gary. Let me answer. First you tell me. No, he said, where are you from? The voice. Who is this? Gary. What do you mean, who is this? You should know who it is. It's me, Gary. And then Gary said, Wait, let me see. Let me ask you a question. Where are you calling from? Gary. Okay, I'll be back. Voice interrupts. Keep an eye on the skies. Excuse me? Near Orion. Uh, I can't hear you too well. The full moon. Gary, yeah, there's a full moon out. That's true. Sound of somebody hanging up on one of the other lines. Gary, can you identify yourself? Identify yourself? His father. Ask him what the purpose of the call is. Gary. Why are you calling me? The voice. Keep an eye on the skies. Excuse me? Near Orion. Gary. I can't hear you too well. His dad. Get on the other phone. It's better. Gary. Hold on, let me switch phones. There's the sound of the other phone being picked up, and then Gary says, okay, hold on. Now, who are you? The voice. Keep an eye on the skies. Keep an eye on the skies, he said. His dad. Keep an eye on the skies. Gary. Yeah. The voice. When? Ask him, can I talk to him? Gary. Shh. His dad. I had a sighting already. Gary. Okay, hold on. Say that. Repeat that again. Gary. Please repeat. The voice. Keep an eye on the skies. Gary. Okay. Near Orion. Gary. Near Orion? Dad. Holy mackerel. Tonight is, or this, or when? The voice. The full moon. Gary. The full moon? His dad in the background. They talk, they hang up. The voice. Show double of you. His dad in the background. Keep an eye on the sky near Orion. Gary. Repeat. His dad. Tell him I'd like to talk to him. Gary. Okay, repeat the last word. Then there's static on the line. There was a lot of static throughout the entire recording. Gary. I'm hearing static. The sound of the caller disconnecting. Gary. He hung up. His dad. He hung up. Gary. Hello. Way back long ago in the 90s, you could have several telephones in one home all on the same line. If you wanted to, you could have a 3 or a 4-way call, as long as everyone had a phone to use. Back then, cell phones were few and far between, so not everyone had them in their room, and hardly anybody had one in their pockets. Having two bizarre calls made everyone expecting more strangeness. The phone rang once more at about 11:30. Once again, Gary hit the record as he was lifting the handset. Gary. Okay, yeah, it's taking time for him to talk. Who is this? The sound of somebody picking up another line. Gary. Steven, I'm gonna. This is not funny, you know. The voice. Barely audible. Who is this? His dad. Brian, it's not Steven. Brian was his younger brother. Gary. What do you mean, Brian? Dad. Gary. Everybody was feeling a bit confused that night by then. Gary. How do I know it's not Steven? Dad. It's not Steven. Dad. Hello? I had a UFO experience in West Virginia, which you probably know. And I know that you're intergalactic person. The voice. Very low and unintelligible. Possibly it said, who is this? His dad. Can you speak a little louder? Sir? Can you speak a little louder? The voice. Very unintelligible this time. The dad. Louder? Gary. Let me speak to him, Dad. I guess I don't know. Dad, okay, I'll hang up so you can talk to him. He wants to talk to you. Gary, okay. The sound of the other line hanging up. Gary, hello? Can I help you? The voice. Hello? Gary, yes? Is Gary Sudbrink there? Yes, that's me. The voice. Here is Gary Sudbrink. Yes, could you please identify yourself? Identify? Faint, very, very faint. You back from Texas? Gary, yeah, I'm back. I'm in Texas right now. The sound of Gary's dad in the background, but I couldn't hear what he said. And Gary, well, he asked me a question. The voice. How long are you? Gary, no, I'm in New York right now. You know that. Why are you asking me such questions? His dad in the background. Assuming he's going to call back 3 times in a row, what are we going to do? A voice. Is it Gary Sudbrink? Yes. Stephen, if this is you, I swear to God, I'm going to be pissed. The sound of Gary's dad in the background. Gary, huh? More static on the line. His dad in the background. It's not Stephen. Gary, I'm trying to listen to him. Who are, excuse me, his dad in the background. You keep playing games with Stephen, and it's not Stephen. His mother in the background. Well, shut up. More static on the line. Gary, okay, eventually I'll be back from Texas. Could you speak more, please? Speak more? There's a whole lot of static on the line at this time. Then the voice, barely audible, high on the sky. Gary, I guess it's not Stephen. I believe it because I'm getting static. Dad, Stephen would not leave 3 times. Gary, let let me on this phone because I could never hear on this phone. Hold on. The sound of the other line being picked up, followed by a quick beep. Gary, okay, please speak. Hello? The voice. Keep an eye on the sky. The sound of writing or scratching, followed by another quick beep. Gary, okay, should I go out right now? Gary, right now? The full moon. Okay, see, I'm not sure where Orion is, but we'll go outside. Show double of you. Gary, it will show double of me? More static on the line. Gary, repeat that again. More static on the line. And then the caller hangs up. And Gary hangs up. The next evening, Gary's mother was out, but his Uncle Tom, hey, that's his name. I have an Uncle Tom. His Uncle Tom had stopped by for a visit. The subject of the weird phone calls came up, which led to a discussion about UFOs and their sightings. Both Gary's father and uncle had both seen UFOs at one time. As they were talking about UFOs, the phone rang. The voice, with more reverb and echo. Is Gary Sudbrink there? Gary, yes, this is me. Can I ask you why? Is Gary Sudbrink there? Yes, can I ask you why you're calling? Just a bunch of static. Can I please ask, is Gary Sudbrink there? Yes, this is Gary Sudbrink. Yes, it's me. The voice. We come to be within this planet. Gary, say that again. In this planet. Gary, leave? We come. I'm standing right here to be within this planet. Is this a joke or what? to visit the many, to be contacted, as the same with you. The sound of a door being shut in the background, and Gary, Then there's a whole bunch of static and a whirring sound coming over the line. Gary, I have to think about that. I'd like to see you. To visit the many, to be contacted, is the same with you. His uncle. Hey, let me tell you something. I've been listening to you and I've had contact with you. Beware government interference. Gary, government interference? The voice. You. Gary, you have, please explain what type of interference. Beware. Okay. A government interference. Visitations to be disrupted by them. Then there's an unidentifiable sound on the line. And then the voice says, appears. The sun will rise on dark side of the moon. World, no. His uncle. The sun will rise? There's an unintelligible comment from the voice. On the dark side of the moon? Okay, then the voice says something that may have been on the moon, but you couldn't really tell listening to the recording. What branch of the government? A whole lot of static on the line. Show double view. More static. Gary, what should I do? More static. Can't understand anything that's being said. And then the voice says, beware. Government interference. Visitations to be disrupted by them. Okay, that's good for me or bad? The caller hangs up. Gary said, they hung up. His dad in the background, so did you get? And then his uncle said, yes, some folks like to say this mysterious caller sounds just like a recording that's been slowed down. The Talk Boy began as a result of a promotional tie-in with the 1992 movie Home Alone 2: Lost in New York. The deluxe Talk Boy was a cassette recorder and player with a variable speed voice changer. It didn't hit the stores until the Christmas season of 1993, which was about half a year after these calls had been made. A few questions did come up surrounding this case. If you listen or read the statements made by the caller and compare them to answers or questions from Gary and his family, they don't match up. It's not so much a conversation as somebody talking without listening. If someone was pranking them, why did they stop after the fourth call? If the person, if it was a person, was doing this for fun, why stop? Why didn't they call other folks and continue confusing people? Listening to the recordings, the caller seemed to lose energy as they were talking. As if the clock was ticking away, the voice would get softer. Folks who have had the unpleasant visit from the men in black say that these pasty-faced creatures talk. It sounds as if they lose energy as their visit lasts. Add to this that MIBs tend to repeat things as they speak, and they're confused by some things that everyone should be familiar with. People who have spoken to the MIBs say they act and sound robotic. MIBs don't warn folks to watch the skies for some mentioned thing. MIBs only warn folks to not talk about the things that they've seen. The caller knew Gary was in Long Island, even though he had kept it mostly secret. His folks knew since he was there, and his friend Mike. The caller asked to speak to Gary on the first evening. It also knew that he lived in Texas at the time. Some of the calls were simply repeated, not just the words, but the actual audio. On the podcast, The In Between, Carol Ann showed spectrograph, which was identical on several of the statements, but not all. The wording, volume, and tempo were different depending on what was being said. As for his surprise trip, anyone seeing Gary taking a flight to New York could easily postulate that he was heading to his parents' house. The caller would have to be able to have seen Gary getting on or off the plane in order to guess he was going to be at his parents' house so the call could be made. In the end of each call, the caller said, "Show double from you." This sounds like a reference to the time his brother had seen Gary on the highway when Gary was still in the plane. The caller said, "You're being impersonated by the other voice," 5 times during the first call. Mike did say he thought Gary had called him from the airport, even when Gary said he hadn't. How many others may have received phone calls from Gary's other voice? In 2000, Gary's mother was receiving treatment for cancer. The people at the clinic told her that her daughter had called asking how the mother was doing. She doesn't have a daughter, just 3 sons. If this was all just a huge prank, the caller must have put in more effort than seems reasonable. A prank isn't something you put hours of research and investigations just to have a little fun for a 2-day period. If the caller was something else, maybe from another dimension or planet, once more, why? Why warn Gary that somebody is impersonating him, and what was he supposed to see while watching the sky near Orion? As far as I could find, Gary was the only person ever to be called by this mystery being. Gary never said he was able to see anything in the sky, and upon returning to work, no one ever told him he had acted odd or done weird things during his absence. I try to keep my shows about an hour long. I could only find so much about Gary Sudbrink and the February calls. To round out the show, here are a few other unexplained phone calls. April 12th, 1999. 4 commercial fishermen prepared to embark on a 7-day trip in the Atlantic. The captain was 23-year-old Billy Joe Nesmith. The crew included his brother, Nathan, his nephew, Keith Wilkes, and a friend, Franklin Brantley. In the late afternoon, they set off on board the Cassie Nicole, owned by a man named Doug Tyson. The boat had recently spent 5 weeks in dry dock for maintenance. Nathan was at the helm at 3:30 in the morning. As he turned the wheel, he felt the boat was responding in a sluggish manner. He woke his brother, telling him there might be something in need of attention. The captain noticed the boat was riding low in the water. They must be taking on water. A quick check in the crew's quarters in the bow found water was about a foot deep. The captain switched on the pumps only to find they weren't working. The 2 brothers woke the rest of the crew and they got to bailing. As buckets were handed from one to the next, the captain thought it would be a good idea to ready the life raft. just in case. He pulled the raft from its locker and he went to make a mayday call. As the water rose, it stalled out the engine. There was no response to their calls for help, so the captain said it was time to abandon ship. Well, boat. The life raft was only designed to hold 2 men. With the engine dead, the power was soon lost. The radio and the lights went off. The crew ran to the life raft and got ready to get wet. As they inflated the raft, they discovered there was a leak. The raft was not going to make it very long. With no choices available, the crew pumped the raft up and threw it into the water. Everybody went over the side and tried to hang on to the leaky raft. By sunrise, the life raft was beginning to sink. They spotted the main hatch cover floating nearby, and they managed to row over to it. The hatch cover was tied to the raft, giving them just a little more buoyancy. With the sun now up, they could see the Cassie Nicole was still mostly above water. It was a distance away, maybe 3 to 4 miles from them, but Nathan thought that they could swim to the boat, which looked far better than the sinking raft and hatch cover. Nathan suggested they swim but the others said, "Nah, it's a bad idea. Too far and too dangerous." Nathan figured this might be the only way to stay alive, so he pushed off and began to swim. The others yelled at him to come back. Nathan just kept going, swimming as fast as he could. He kept going in the direction he thought the boat should be, but he kept losing sight of it in the waves. It was all he could do to make the distance. By the time he was close to the boat, Nathan was feeling sick from swallowing seawater, and his arms and legs were spent. Once he was next to the boat, Nathan could only cling to the side, which was just above the water. He tried to spot his fellow crewmen from his new position, but he lost sight of them as the sun went down. By the next morning, Nathan saw a freighter in the distance. It looked as if it was circling the area where he thought his friends were. Every so often it would come to a stop before moving on again. He hoped that maybe the freighter had found them and was rescuing everyone. The freighter continued its odd movement for nearly 3 hours, and then it disappeared. For 2.5 days, Nathan drifted and prayed that the Cassie Nicole would stay afloat. Suddenly, a large wood and styrofoam bait box broke loose from the boat's deck, and it popped to the surface. Nathan swam over to the bait box and crawled inside. It was kind of like a huge square boat. At 10 a.m., April 15th, 1990, Nathan Nesmith was finally rescued 20 miles off the coast of Georgia. He had been adrift without food or water for 4 days. Despite a large-scale search, the other fishermen were never found. One day, a few months after this event, Nathan's sister, Onita, received a phone call. The male voice spoke only Spanish and seemed unable to understand anything that she said in English. The caller kept repeating the phone number and then saying their last name. After a few minutes, the line filled with static and went dead. That same day, a call was received by Doug Tyson, owner of the Cassie Nicole. Once again, the caller was a man, spoke only Spanish. The only English words he seemed to know were Doug's name and telephone number. Tyson didn't tell anyone about the weird phone call until he was visiting the Nesmith family 6 weeks after the accident. Onita told him she had gotten a call from somebody that spoke Spanish who kept repeating the phone number. They had both gotten a call on the same day. Over the following year, Onita received 3 more phone calls and Tyson got 2. This time the caller said, "Very simple words. Just said I'm bringing him home. That was it." After only a moment, the connection was lost. There have been no more calls since. The question isn't so much what became of the crew of the Cassie Nicole. They probably either drowned or died from exposure. The question is, who made those phone calls and why? Could some man who only spoke Spanish have found one of the bodies and maybe discovered the phone numbers? Well, 2 phone numbers in their clothing? If this was the case, the caller could easily have found somebody who could speak English to tell the family what had happened. Plus, why call over and over if the caller already knew the people on the other end of the line didn't speak Spanish? The last phrase in English really topped the cake. Very simple words. Just said, "I'm bringing him home." That was it. 2007, the Kuykendall family was living in Firecrest, Washington, when their daughter's phone started sending out text messages on its own. 16-year-old Courtney said the phone would message her friends on its own free will. The messages were nothing to get excited about, but she swore she wasn't sending them. After these text messages, a series of phone calls from someone with a scratchy voice started coming from a number that was listed as restricted. The calls would describe what the family was doing at that moment and what they were wearing. The Kuykendall neighbor, Andrea McKay, said she was also receiving calls from a restricted number along the same lines as the Kuykendalls. One day, when she was cutting limes in her kitchen, a mysterious call came through, and the voice on the other end told her it preferred lemons. The calls began to escalate from juvenile prank to serious threats within a short period of time. Heather Kirkendall said, "The caller said you're going to die. We hate you. We're going to murder you." The family also reported that calls would come in at all hours of the day and night, threatening to murder everyone that they knew, including their pets. McKay received a call one day telling her there was going to be a school shooting. The two families began to worry about what the caller might do to them. The families were both getting death threats. These restricted calls seemed to exist solely to make them paranoid. Calls would come in from the mysterious person telling them what they were wearing and what they were doing. Sometimes the call would be a recording of a conversation one of the families had that day or the day before. One call was a recording of a conversation between one of the families and the detectives. The Kuykendalls tried changing phones, switching their numbers, but the calls just kept coming. Police took these calls seriously. They tried tracing the calls, only to wind up being led back to one or the other's home. Like that movie, "The calls are coming from inside the house." The police didn't think this was any kind of a hoax, so they began looking into some kind of computerized attack. The local police reached out to the Department of Homeland Security. Their chief suspect started out being 16-year-old Courtney. When they could find zero proof that she was the culprit, they ran out of suspects. A detective said, "At this point, we aren't saying it's somebody inside the family, but it's someone that is close enough to them to know a lot about them. It seems like it's someone who is tied into the group, a family member, a friend, or an enemy." After dealing with lengthy police investigation, swapping out phones numerous times, installing security systems in their homes, neither families nor the authorities has come to any conclusions. No one seems to know who made these calls or why. The entire story seems to have evaporated after the first couple of reports. The Kuykendall and the McKay families have kept their social media presence very low. In fact, it is as if they've all kind of fallen off the radar completely. If there ever was a harasser, he or she was not likely to be caught since it was never reported since the first few. Phone hacking or phone phreaking has been going on since the 50s. Phone phreaks explored the mysteries of the phone system by hacking payphones and learning how to impersonate phone operators in order to make free calls. If a phone phreak was talented enough, they could definitely wiretap someone. While phone phreaks don't necessarily exist in the 21st century, the desire to game the phone system and find technological workarounds is always with us. The calls to the Kuykendalls and the McKays were made in 2007, the same year the iPhone was released. This means that digital technology required to tap into someone's phone would have been easy to find. At that time, all you needed to listen to someone's voicemail was their 4-digit passcode. With the right software, you could track a person's every movement due to GPS technology. Methods for tapping a phone involve everything from getting your hands on the device and manually cloning it to using software in order to keep an eye on someone from a distance. Articles on how easy it is to hack into a phone makes it all more plausible that somebody who lived near the Kuykendalls decided to have a little fun before things got out of hand. As technology improves, those folks who do bad or evil things manage to keep, if not running alongside, if not, they manage to get ahead of the people doing this electronic security. The culprits making the harassing calls and texts have never been caught. The authorities don't even have any suspects in mind. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell people you don't even know that they should be listening to Strange Things with Chris James. If you have any weird stories that you'd like to see in print, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. They can be UFO, cryptid, ghosts, or just plain weird stories, and I'll see about putting them in my next book. I hope that phone call that I edited into this thing sounds right. If not, I don't know. I'm not going to fix it, but I can only hope. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. Man, I can't find the off button there.
Are you coming to the tree where there's strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.